Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us just in time. I was saying earlier to our panel that's upcoming, in many ways, the entire event has been introducing, leading up to, building up to this. Just in time for a new era, can supply chains become more resilient and still stay lean? We've heard quite a lot about the challenges that we're facing, including just previously from Drury, how container shipping lead times have pretty much doubled since before the pandemic, that any given shipping lane probably sees a variation between days to weeks, which obviously makes it very difficult to plan on an even level, to set inventories at a set level. And then that's not even taking into consideration what's happening in semiconductors, what's happening with driver shortages, what's happening in Russia, Ukraine, and the rest that you are all very aware of. So we've heard quite a lot of challenges to just in time. We've heard just in case raised quite a bit. And we want to talk about this session in terms of, okay, what are some of the real potential solutions around this? But also, as I alluded to for those of you that dinner last night, that maybe we simplify what we mean sometimes when we talk about just in time. And we in the media are probably especially guilty of this. That it means zero inventory, that it literally means parts arriving to the line at that moment, and ignoring the wider context of the lean management philosophies that go behind it. And of course, the company that pretty much invented, or at least spread across the automotive industry, the values and principles of just-in-time are Toyota. And so who better to help us understand how this process thinking both is part of a solution for the current challenges we're facing, but also how it adapts, and maybe to better understand exactly what it means in the context of 2022 and all we're facing. So our first speaker is been in the automotive industry for 20 plus years, was working in aftermarket, joined Toyota in 2014 in a variety of roles, and in 2019 took the lead position across logistics, inbound, outbound, service parts, and more recently also adding production control. You may have encountered him at some of our online events. He's a wonderful speaker and truly inspiring, and I'm really pleased to welcome Leon van der Werve, who's explained to us exactly what we're misunderstanding about just-in-time and the Toyota production system. So Leon, I'm going to hand over to you for the keynote, and then afterwards we'll bring in our panel. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Christopher. That's a little bit of a tough one to follow. So hopefully I can live up to expectations. So I was just saying, I'm not sure whether I'm happier following on Drury's presentation of the reality of the world we're still living in, or rather have followed on the vehicle logistics one, which is all talking about some great solutions in the future. But let's go for it. So let me start a little bit about who is Toyota Motor Europe. I doubt there's anyone in the room who doesn't know Toyota. But as a Japanese manufacturer, we set up in Europe in about 1963. We sell over 1.1 million vehicles last year into the Europe market. And we've got about a 6.4% market share. But maybe the bit I'm most proud of is the fact that 58% of the vehicles we sell in Europe are electrified. It's a combination of hybrid, fuel cell, plug-in hybrid, and full BEV. And this, as an environmental credential for us, is incredibly important. As a manufacturing business unit, we've got 9 factories across Europe, manufacturing not just vehicles, A, B, and C segment vehicles, but also manufacturing the majority of the engines and transmissions that are used in Europe. And 8 out of 10 of the vehicles we sell in Europe are now produced in Europe for Toyota. So again, this is all about localization. as far as possible. But what is our supply chain? As Christopher explained, my role has slowly grown, and the crisis has facilitated this, where we now in Toyota see supply chain actually starting from project management. So for all vehicles that will be produced in Europe over the next 5 years, the management of the master schedule for that is now my responsibility. Why? To ensure that we can then set up the appropriate supply chain to support that. My teams then manage both the 3-year, 1-year, monthly, daily production plannings for all of our plants. I look after the production inbound logistics, the finished vehicle or outbound logistics, and full service parts supply chain. So slightly more than a full-time job at the moment with all the crises going on. To do this, we've got a very sophisticated network across Europe that starts with our cross-docks and consolidation points for inbound logistics. We have then setting up and renewing a very, what's the right word I'm trying to look for? Ambitious plan in how we're going to revolutionize our hubs and our outbound logistics going forward. But also got a very big warehouse facility dedicated to our service parts. So, as you can see from the map, basically, there's almost not a country in Europe that we don't have facilities. But let's look at supply chain in a little bit of numbers. So, we've got about 4,000 people working on our sites in order to keep our supply chain moving. We move parts or vehicles on average 10 times around the globe every day. So an enormous footprint, but also an enormous carbon footprint. We produce nearly 800,000 vehicles a year in Europe, and this, as I said, is supporting the sales of over the 1.1 million vehicles. But also, we do a lot of export. But I don't want to just spend time of saying, this is Toyota. We're here to talk about crisis. And this is a little bit the roadmap since I took over supply chain. Thank you, yes. That's what my boss keeps on telling me. So we have moved from one crisis to the next. Whether this has been Brexit, COVID, flooding, fires, snow, driver shortage, take your choice. And I thought with my team, when we set up the slide 4 weeks ago, ending in March with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, things couldn't get much tougher. As we heard just before this, we've now got Shanghai in full lockdown, and for us, an enormous impact was the flooding in South Africa, because we've got a factory in the heart of the worst hit area. So what has become very clear to me is there is no new normal. The only consistent we've got is that we're going to have another crisis. So really, what I want to talk about for the rest of this time is how do we get back to basics to do this? But before I do that, I want to touch on what I thought was going to be the biggest crisis we were talking about today, which is the Russia-Ukraine crisis. We have got a factory in Russia, we've got a sales business in Russia, and we've got a sales business in Ukraine. And through this ongoing war, we have had to suspend supply chain through all of these areas. But maybe the bit I want to focus on a little bit, the bit that makes me most proud as Toyota, is not how we suspended our activities, but actually how our members pulled together to support our more than 3,000 Ukrainian employees that we've got in Europe. We have now repatriated over 1,200 members out of Ukraine, set up housing for them, got them registered into the local communities, setting up schools for them, medical, and all of this. And this is not a pat on the back for Toyota. This is a pat on the back for the members who work for Toyota, because this has been facilitated and managed by nearly 10,000 volunteers within our organization. It has been primarily financed by our members. As Toyota, we have committed for every euro our members give, we will give 4. But actually, our members have been so open-hearted in this, it's absolutely unbelievable. So this is just a shout out to them. Let's get back to the reason we're here. So, you saw that roadmap of crisis. But I'm a great believer that that roadmap is just preparing us for the biggest crisis we're going to face. And that is the environmental crisis. Because nothing we have seen compares to what is coming up. If we as an industry, if we as a nations do not limit our CO2 to below this 1.5% impact, actually all the activities we're doing are in vain. So everything I'm presenting today, I classify as university fees towards how do we resolve the ultimate issue, which is environmental. So in Toyota, there are no big fancy ways I'm going to give you a silver bullet today that's going to fix everything. Because everything that we do is about going back to basics. Managing what is in your control. Because there's so much we cannot control, therefore let's not focus on trying to manage it. Let's manage what's in my control. And the way we do that is we started with something that's called an obeya. Now, this is, again, nothing fancy. In the true Japanese way, which was not always possible in COVID, we take all the decision makers, we all move into a room, we start with the process of bad news first. So don't come in and tell me how good you fixed the last problem. Tell me what is the next problem we need to fix tomorrow, what are the options and what are the decisions you need. And this is the basis and the fundamental of all of our crisis management, is on a daily, twice a day, once a week, depends on the crisis and the intensity. As an executive team in Toyota, we meet and we make the decisions that are needed to keep the company moving. But all of these decisions need to know where they're taking us. So this is a very small extract of what is our supply chain strategy going forward. Because as the executive team of Toyota, we've been very clear. All the crises we've had are not changing our path of where we're going. What they might be changing is a little bit the road we take to get there. But therefore, every decision we make in our obeya is about how do we deliver this creating happiness for all, about delivering the right product in the right place at the right time. I think that's everybody's objective in this room. But it's about how do we get there? How do we exceed our customers' expectations? And how do we make sure all our members are engaged and part of the solution? To do this, we've got a 4-stage approach that we're going to get there, which starts from restructuring the foundations to be the logistics department of the future. And then each of my functions have got a roadmap to get there. And therefore, every decision we make is reflected, does it still get us there? If it doesn't get us there, why are we taking that decision today? But this doesn't work without people. So we have also got a very clear strategy of how we are going to develop our people, make our organization more agile and more resilient. And this starts that during all these crises of COVID, we relaunched a new updated version of the Toyota Way. And this is reinforced and delivered through what we call the 5 C's. And this is about coaching. This is about creativity. This is about courage. This is about curiosity and collaboration. Because without those, we do not deliver what we want. But also, maybe for Toyota, very late to the party, we have realized that our diversity strategy is severely lacking. If I look at my team in supply chain, total Toyota team, we do not reflect society in our diversity. If I look at this room, we don't reflect society. So how are we going to make the decisions to make sure we get every brain in the game? And that's become a key part of the way we deliver and solve problems. But also never forgetting each individual member of how do we skill up our members for this ever-changing world? How do we move them from I don't know to what I don't know to a point of I'm an expert at what I do in this changing world? So again, this is the backbone of the Toyota Way. But let's move into the Toyota Way, maybe that some of you would recognize. And the Toyota production system starts with how do we visualize the problem? How do we bring in stable and standardized processes? Because if you don't have a standardized process, you cannot Kaizen or continuously improve it. And how do you do leveled up production, Heijunka, flat production, as far as possible to bring stability? All of this is delivered through the topic of today, just in time. And just to be very clear to the audience, in case they didn't know, we don't do just in case. Why don't we do just in case? On average, we produce one vehicle every 55 seconds. In order for me to have enough parts for one plant for one day, I need a football pitch full of parts to 3 to 4 meters high. That's for one plant, we've got 9. That's for one day. If I want to buffer my supply chain, I need 20 days. For us, that just doesn't make sense because it costs a fortune and you can't see where your problems are. Jadoko, which is all about automation with a human touch. As Toyota, we believe absolutely in automation. But first, resolving the problems as a human being, and then bringing in the automation to reinforce it. We don't believe automation brings all the solutions. And then this delivers us best quality, lowest cost, shortest lead time, best safety, and high morale. You will notice on there, nowhere does it say no parts in the supply chain. What it means is about how do we deliver the end picture. But maybe let's take this into a little bit more reality. I think all of you would recognize this. Woke up one morning to my team telling me, guess what, Leon? One of the busiest shipping lanes in the world is blocked. Never mind the fact we've got a few containers on that ship. We've got hundreds of containers in all the other ships that need to pass through here in the next few days. And very quickly, what we realize is that TPS, Toyota Production System, does not have a page in the manual that explains what to do when the Suez Canal is blocked. It would have made my life very easy. Leon, go to page 142, read up this, and we do it. TPS is about a set of principles. It's about taking that principle and applying it back. So the first thing we needed to do, again, no rocket science, assess the problem, understand what is where, both in the Suez Canal, but also in our broader supply chain. What is the implications of this to us? And then, what can I do about it? I could not dislodge that ship. Doesn't matter how much I wanted to do, that was out of my control. So let's go back to what was in my control. And what became very clear very quickly is what was in my control was actually I needed to shut down my production facilities. Because if COVID and everything else has taught us anything over the last 2.5 years, is what we don't want to do is destroy the continuity of our supply chain. Because it is far more effective to shut down the supply chain in a clean way that when we are ready, we can immediately reopen it. Because if you do what my factories call as tapping, give us these parts, give us those parts, give us those parts, yes, we might produce 1 more day's worth of cars. But actually, it'll take me 2, 3, 4 days to restart my supply chain. Because everything we do is in sequence parts. So therefore, one of the big shifts in Toyota over this crisis is the fact and the acknowledgement that an intact supply chain is one of our biggest assets. So we did that. And in doing that, we needed to consider the bigger picture. We had to have the visualization of the entire area. But we needed to make sure we did not break the principle of our cyclic approach, Heijunka. Because the minute you break that, you lose efficiency. We didn't want to break the principle of shortest lead time. We didn't want to break the principle of customer first. And as you can see on the right side of the screen there this is genuinely our priorities, is safety first, quality first, volume meaning customer first, and only then do we look at profit. And that sounds very, I don't know what it is, but I can assure you after 8 years of working for Toyota and a few years before that working for other Japanese manufacturers, this is genuine. Profit is not the first driver, and that's what allows you to succeed. But let's take another example. Again, we discussed this lots yesterday, semiconductors. Just as we think we're getting over COVID, semiconductor arrives. And as we heard yesterday, is the problem OEMs downgraded their forecast? Is the problem that everyone's working at home and wanted a new TV? Is the problem that the semiconductor industry didn't plan well enough? Actually, I don't care. What I care about is what is the implication to me? And how do I work with that implication? So we created a very simple rule. 1 semiconductor equals 1 vehicle equals 1 sale. And that last bit of it is very important. We made a decision we would not build cars that were not complete. Because there's no benefit to the customer. Having a whole pile of cars sitting on my parking lot without headlights carries no value. Because the customer cannot get them. And when the customer does get them, he's most probably going to have quality problems because somebody that's not the expert in the plant fitted those headlamps. So this was our strategy. The implications of this was not easy. This means in Toyota's history, we have planned our production and we've lived by that plan. If we say we're going to produce car A, then car B, then car C, that's exactly what we needed to do. What we did was create a system and a platform that allowed us to produce the vehicles that we've got parts for. So in some of our plants, we had to only produce one drivetrain, not another. In another of our plants, we needed to produce one model and not another, or one destination because they had a specific spec and not another. And this sounds easy, but on a daily basis, we had to reallocate and reprioritize millions of parts. We needed to take all the sequenced parts out of the network, store them in a sequenced way, remembering the principle, don't damage your supply chain. So everything we did, we had to keep sequenced, that the minute somebody said, Leon, there's another semiconductor, I could say, great, let's produce that car. And this, for us, was a fundamental revolution in Toyota. Because hopefully none of my EMCs, one of my plants are listening. But what it did was it moved us from being a manufacturing plant-centric organization to a supply chain-centric organization. Now, all of this sounds simple, it sounds counterintuitive. Well, how are we going to look after the customer? Well, what we're going to do is shut down the plants. That doesn't sound logical. But let me assure you, it worked. Because what you see here is Toyota Motor Europe's results since before the crisis to now, where we have moved from 7th place in market share in Europe to 2nd place in market share in Europe with a growth of significant market share. Now, the first question I always get, well, is this sustainable? Well, the good news, at least for me, is our market share has grown to 7.6% in the first quarter of this year. Now, if everything goes back to normal, will I lose some market share? No doubt. If the wrong supplier gets put into lockdown, will I lose some market share? No doubt. But what we see is over a sequence of decisions, to use a good supermarket's advert, basket for basket, at the end of the day, this strategy works for Toyota. And we're not saying everybody else needs to do this. But for us to answer the question that we're going to go now into the panel discussion, is just in time, is Toyota Production Systems still fit for the future? From our perspective, absolutely yes. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Over to you, Christoph.
Leon, we thank you. Thank you, and I think you more than lived up to the billing. So please, please, maybe just take a seat at the end there. Fantastic, Leon. I think, as said, we've got a great insight into how you've been managing the crisis. Oh, the panel is joining me. That's good. Well, they're beating me to the introduction, so that's my cue to speed on with it. We want to move into a panel discussion now with some of other experts, so I'm happy to welcome to the stage or introduce them from the stage now. Michael Meitzer, Group Vice President, Professional Services for E2 Open, and Dave Dudek, Executive Vice President, Global Automotive and Tire Sector Lead at Siva Logistics. So great to have you with us to join. Leon has certainly given us plenty to reflect on. And indeed, he makes the powerful case that TPS and lean certainly remain relevant, even in the current context. But I'm interested to hear your view, because clearly there are nuances to the approach, and how you're seeing lean or just-in-time supply chains adjust or react. So I thought we can start with the other panelists first on that. I'm going to turn to you, Dave.
Sure. Have excellent presentation, by the way, and it's very interesting to see the approach that Toyota takes, which is different than maybe some other companies that we work with, OEMs, tiers, et cetera. One of the things I have seen in these, let's say, challenging times is many of our customers have taken decision-making at a more local level and allowed the regions or the countries to help manage, their supply chain closer, where they can make quicker decisions. In the past, there was maybe more centralized decision-making, which could take overnight with time zones. And when that takes place, it lowers the efficiency as well as sometimes the options and flexibility. So that's kind of a theme I've seen. But But I have seen as well, obviously, the customers adding in additional warehousing, additional modes of transportation to enhance the flexibility of their supply chain.
Michael.
Well, I think it was a very clear message on the lean approach and the just-in-time approach that Toyota is taking. I think it has the perspective of really focusing on optimizing the process for Toyota as a corporation. I think there will be companies out there that will consider defining lean maybe more in a network dimension to basically say, hey, I have an ecosystem of suppliers and suppliers of suppliers that I want to tie into my supply chain. And then if you look at lean in that context, you need to look beyond just optimizing your own inventory, and that may challenge the just-in-time notion that Toyota is executing.
It's interesting, I think, Leon, and you're best to comment on that, but for you it seems it's more about an approach to solving a problem than necessarily saying, I carry zero inventory on a given moment and just operate that way, correct?
Yes, quite correct. I mean, the real objective of just-in-time is to allow you to visualize the problems in your network. Because if I've got a big pile of stock here, a big pile of stock here, a big pile of stock there, I can't see when I'm going to run out. But if we've got a buy one, sell one version of one piece there, one piece there, one piece there, I can very quickly see my whole supply chain and understand where's the problem, and therefore, how do I need to solve that problem? And you're quite right, Christopher. I think my big learning when I joined Toyota 8 years ago is every member in Toyota is a problem solver. We don't have a problem-solving team. We don't wait for the management or anybody else to solve the problems. Every person is a problem solver. And that is what makes Toyota Production System a lifestyle rather than just a process that you implement.
Let's come back to some of the clear challenges that we're seeing, and I'm interested to get the panel's view on it. So clearly, we heard from Drew earlier about the China lockdowns and the impacts we're seeing. Do you think, Dave, starting with you, those who have kind of already built up inventory ahead of time are likely to sort of benefit from that, or perhaps it will require a quite flexible prioritization approach? And so who, from a supply chain point of view, who do you think kind of gains from that point?
Well, I think there is a large amount of inventory, as Philip mentioned, already on the way to Europe or North America. So it's quite interesting to me. Some of my customers are very, very nervous. There's a hole coming to them. I'm surprised to hear others maybe not so vocal on that. Maybe they're keeping it inside, but it scares me because I know I have a lot of staff in Shanghai locked down. I know we haven't been able to obtain some of our parts in our warehouses. And I mean, it's really an ugly issue, and we're not sure when that's going to totally be up to speed. So I see that issue coming, and the supply chain, because it's been extended, you won't feel those effects for a while. But you know, I think the positive thing for the OEM perspective, many of them are doing quite well because they're able to charge more for their vehicles and they are profitable. And we've seen them become quite successful in building the models that can provide them the most profit. And so they have been making a lot of these strategic decisions around what parts do we really want to ensure we have the most strategic inventory on hand. So I think they're going to be okay, but we're going to see a lot of expedite freight filling these holes in the pipeline, and a lot of overtime for the tier one suppliers in China trying to catch up for many months.
It's come up a few times in other panels, perhaps in some cases related to battery, perhaps in this case it might be related to China, about positioning more strategic inventory buffer locations at various points in the supply chain. And hopefully this isn't football pitches stacked, stacked 10 high, but quite tactical, need to be identified through visibility as well. And I just wonder, from the panel's point of view, is that a trend you're already seeing? Is that something you're working with already? Michael, from your point of view?
First of all, I would say, yes, companies that have created a direct interaction with a critical component supplier, jumping the tiers of supply chain, have an advantage in these days. I know this from other industries that I've been consulting, that they had the chip and semiconductor issues many years already ago, where they need to, if you look at the network equipment companies like Nokia or Ericsson, they were always faced with the fact that their customer lead times was much, much shorter than the semiconductor companies could do. And as a result of it, they basically said, I cannot just work with my direct supplier if the source of supply chain constraint is much deeper upstream in the supply chain, and hence building up relationships for some critical components, not for any, for the critical components was a strategy that worked for them. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you can put buffer inventories to assume for any crisis that may work, right? Then you run into excess inventories that are not viable. So then it's more about optimizing inventory in the network. Right, so that may still be for a car manufacturer to say, I'm running very lean, but I have some collaboration interaction points with other partners in my supply chain to see where the buffers are, because I'm pretty sure, even in Toyota supply chain, somebody else is carrying some inventory in order to be able to restart and serve your production. So then the question is, strategy one is, do you trust that based on the signals you give them, they manage this? Or are you getting closer into managing jointly what should happen upstream in the supply chain? I've seen both models work.
No, I think from our side, we totally agree. As I said, the objective of just-in-time is not to have stock. The objective of just-in-time is to make sure every piece of stock has a purpose. And as we heard from Jury, if the container shipping line lead time is increased from 40 days to 70 days, we've got to increase our buffer stock from 40 days to 70 days for parts that follow that. But therefore, it is stock that has got a purpose. What we don't do is the just in case. Well, okay, just in case that now goes to 90 days, let's put another 20 days worth of stock in it. So it's about slowly, because you get the extreme scenarios where it goes from 40 days to 70 days overnight. But actually, normally that happens in a process where it goes from 40 days to 45 days to 50 days. And do our systems allow us, as this changes, to increase that stock level? And as it decreases, to increase it back down? And again, it's back down to what is the purpose of the stock you hold? It's not just sitting there for in case, but making sure that it's there to look after our customers.
Leon, I have one question from your presentation where in the supply chain you showed that you actually have hubs to basically service certain parts across companies. So isn't that also a strategy that helps you to balance out the inventory buffer that you need? And it's just a matter of deciding the strategy on that replenishment point?
Or first thing is, the hubs is our outbound logistics.
Okay.
So where we produce vehicles, we store them as we distribute them to the customers. On our inbound logistics, we purely run cross-docks and consolidation points, where the objective is a part is never there more than 24 hours. I think the purists in Toyota will say never there more than an hour or two, but in reality is what arrives this morning has to leave tonight. So from that perspective, in inbound logistics, no, we do not carry stock there. But I do need to say again is, if we've got a container that's coming from Japan and takes 40 days, in our store in the plant, we've got to keep 40 days worth of stock. The point is we're not going to keep 50 days worth of stock.
Okay, but then you also see the potential that if you work to create an inventory hub, right, not a logistics hub in a sense, that you could still manage fairly lean inventories, but still give you more flexibility to buffer certain dimensions. And with software technology today, you wouldn't even need to make this a physical inventory hub, right? I've seen high-tech companies operate on virtual inbound hubs so that they can basically balance out also a little bit the component challenge that you have on the BOMs for your cars, or in that case for high-tech equipment, right? As you rightly described, you need the right components in the right plants, and if you have some variations, it might be an evolving strategy to have a virtual inbound hub that helps you without increasing the buffer stock for every individual site.
I can see why people would be attracted to that. But for us as Toyota to do that, we have to change our fundamentals. And in order to change fundamentals, you've got to have a problem you're trying to fix. And at the moment, we do not see a problem that will be fixed by that. So if you've got a totally different production system, if you're producing in bulk, if you're doing things like that, absolutely, I can see the value on that. But from our perspective and the way we work, at this point, we haven't seen that coming. Will it maybe change in the future? Maybe. But as of today, no, we don't see the benefit of that.
And it's really interesting. And Dave, have you seen, amongst the customers you're working with, you don't have to name any names or anything, but are you seeing others taking a different approach in that way? Taking perhaps whether it's the virtual or inventory location or more strategic buffer locations, however the...
Yes, I'm seeing definitely some of the OEMs and tiered suppliers we work with putting in, let's say, strategic inventories in new locations typically in the geography where the destination production facilities are. And probably quite a bit different way than what Leon has been presenting earlier. So it is a different philosophy. And I think some of my history, being an American, I can say that there is probably a different level of where profit fits on the mentality of management. Probably that's the number one line versus number four. And so a lot of decision-making in some of those companies at the top level does come to maximizing profit. And maximizing profit means you need to build the vehicles that give that best profit. So then that comes down the supply chain as make sure you're running those plants to get those vehicles so we can profit.
That's an interesting point, because then it was also very clear over the last 18 months, many OEMs have prioritized vehicles and prioritized the higher margin vehicles. Leon, you very clearly were prioritizing in the supply chain. Was the margin consideration part of that, or was it less?
Yes, I think I don't want to create the illusion we don't care about profit. We're still a company, we're still going to make money. But it's where that profit decision sits into the criteria. So if I've got 10 semiconductors and I can make 10 loss-making vehicles or 10 profitable vehicles, no doubt I will make the 10 profitable vehicles. But it's within that scale that we are making, not how can I drain my supply chain to make another 10? And that's where the difference comes in.
Yeah. I'm going to open for questions, but actually, Michael, you sort of alluded there to what you see in other industries, high tech, for example. So I was just interested in how you sort of compare what you see in automotive. If we take the semiconductor shortage, for example, or other supply chain shortages we've been talking about, are other sectors managing it differently, better, with more success compared to what you've seen in automotive?
Well, first of all, I would agree with Leon that changing the model from one strategy to another is a big change, right? And you're gonna face the reality that you will have to have people think about supply chain a little bit differently, right? And that means that you establish a collaborative attitude, not only within the different functions within the company, but you become much more collaborative and closer in sharing your plans and execution strategies with your suppliers and your suppliers' suppliers. Right? And that means also that you need to share and exchange data on a broader scale. And for that, you also need technology that can bring that together and drive that decision making. And yes, you will have a stronger focus to still deal with allocations, right? Because even the the most optimal inventory lead to situations where you need to make trade-offs, right? Who do you let these trade-offs make, right? And in other industries where companies have relied on this is my order or this is my forecast, very often the consequence of it is that the suppliers is deciding on their behalf who to prioritize, assuming they're not single-sourced, of course, okay? And hence, companies are running the strategy to say, hey, I extend my planning across my network so that I make the allocation decisions when components are short myself, rather than let somebody down the supply chain tiers decide on that, okay? But again, it's a huge shift, and I fully understand why you would not wreck your current successful model for something that basically constitutes a lot of effort and change in the ways of working.
Any questions from the audience? From Michelle, can I have a mic here to the corner? Up to the front, yeah, you see, there she is.
Hi, Michelle Carter from IAC Group. So totally agree, Liam, with what you're saying about inventory optimization and having that conscious decision of having inventory where it's needed. However, as a tier one, it sometimes feels like we're almost the ham in the sandwich because we're seeing all the risks from the rate increases and the market constraints, and then seeing very, very, very short notice of OEM shutdowns, which we absolutely do our best to respond to. In Toyota, how do you manage to share the risk, share the impact, and minimize that across your whole network?
I think first thing to say, not good enough. So it doesn't matter how good our results are, there's loads of room for improvement. I mean, I think one of the big challenges we've had through all these crises is our short notice. We didn't know when COVID was going to hit or when COVID wasn't going to hit. We don't know, even as Toyota, we often receive less than 2 weeks worth of forecast from our tier ones that can bring our plants to a standstill. So the problem goes all the way down. And I recognize your analogy that you're the sandwich stuck in the middle. Absolutely, we do recognize that. And we do try and communicate as openly and as clearly as possible, but it's not always good enough. And we do recognize that. So I don't think I've got a magic solution for you. Apart from actually, we need to just continually work together as partnership to figure out how we can do it.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? We have one right from Paulina here. Thank you.
Hi, Paulina Chmielasz from Jaguar Land Rover. Leon, I wanted to ask a very specific question in that big picture around supply chain between purchasing, manufacturing. How did you specifically set up your production control teams? And what was the importance or any specific strategy you had towards those teams?
Well, our production control team is our control tower. So actually, it's a little bit the reverse. How do we set everything else up around our production control team? Because actually, our production control team, to a degree, have the final yes or no. They're the people who analyze what is the market forecast, where do we need to produce what, and then they're the ones who turn around and say, okay, we need to produce these vehicles, purchasing, make sure there's parts, logistics, make sure we can deliver the parts. So it's a little bit actually making sure that everyone recognizes they are the decision maker. And then from there, everything cascades down from that.
Then a follow-up question. If they were the core of the control tower, when you had all of those feedback from supply chain about shortages and balances, how much that ownership was in the production control team versus your supply chain teams? Who was prioritizing, or what kind of selection rules were in the prioritization?
Production control always had final say. But their job was to get the feedback from all the different areas in order to make that decision. But in order to be clear, I work on a very simple philosophy that when we say everyone makes a decision, nobody makes a decision. There's always got to appoint a responsible, And in this scenario, the decision was production control had the final say. But in order to do that, they had to demonstrate that they had done the nimawashi, the approach with everybody else, that they could justify that decision. And when they generally brought that decision to be made, actually the decision had already been made because everybody was in agreement. So,
Thank you very much.
Excellent. I know we're running towards the end, but I'll definitely take another audience question if there is one, giving privilege to anyone. Yep, a question right in the middle of the room.
Hi, I'm Christine from Mobile Cars. I have a question to Michael. Since we are using your product in the OBL, my question is, due to the last 1 or 2 years, we have many lessons learned from the disruptive period like COVID or semiconductor shortage or whatsoever. But from IT solution-wise, have you got any lesson learned? And what is your future product can meet the new normal? Thank you.
I think the lessons learned is, first of all, you need to have visibility if you want to understand the problem as early as possible. And then you need to be able to take decisions from that. And the data that you need to make decisions in such a complex supply chain world needs to be broader than just what is on your own fingertips as a company. Right? That's why from an E2Open perspective, we have invested since years into a network of partners, logistics providers, clients, tier 1, tier 2, in order to get the exchange of information floating, right, to streamline. Now, the data challenge as such is always something that needs to have a certain quality standards, and technology needs to evolve to help customers to cleanse some of those data from the different partners in order to still retain it actionable. I think this is where smarter algorithms will help to basically help with the data hygiene on top of the process discipline that companies will need.
Maybe a follow-on from that question to Leon, obviously, because you made it very clear how important seeing where things were so that you could then problem solve based on it. So how has Toyota been investing further in improved visibility systems, using different technology to do that?
yes, I mean, as much as I said very clearly in Judoka, it's about automation with the human touch. We also cannot not invest in automation. So yes, we are continuously updating our systems, changing our systems, but it's based on the process that we want to do it, rather than saying, how do we get IT to fix our problems? We've got to fix the problems, and then we need people like Michael to come up and say, how do we guarantee that continues? But you cannot just turn around and say, actually, by implementing this IT systems, everything's good. That's the bit we don't believe in.
And then maybe my last question, Dave, it sort of follows on from things that were discussed from last session. Clearly, the massive disruption on container side. One of the points that Philippe raised was some trends for more integrated services, and CEVA and CMA is a clear example. In future, another brand getting added to that. In Jeffco, we can't talk in much detail about that, of course, because it's ongoing, but nonetheless, it's that much is coming. So to what extent do you see this sort of shift and integration as a way to perhaps better control, manage these parts of the supply chain in a just-in-time lean context?
Right, well, I think, as mentioned before, even in Philip's presentation, you can't think about port to port. You need to look at really the full supply chain end to end, and I think that was the vision of why Rudolf Sade bought CEVA. We bring that capability, and I think we also now have been made better because we can also leverage the assets where we were asset light in the past. Now we also, being part of the group, have assets and are now going to improve that with some more capability with Jeffco coming on board. So I think that allows us to be much more agile. I think it gives us more flexibility, and it lets us prioritize with our customers what their needs are. And our customers do have different approaches to the supply chain, but we can be flexible to provide different types of solutions for them. And I would say we have much more capability now being part of the group, and I think that's going to help mitigate some issues that maybe we wouldn't have had in the past.
Maybe help you to see where some of the problems are, as Leon said, so you can address it. I think this is a fantastic discussion. It was a very inspiring presentation and lots of comments to follow, and I appreciate your interaction with the audience as well. We'll end it there, just in the interest of time, but I expect there'll be plenty more to put to our panel, so please take advantage of the time whilst here. But thank you, all of you, Leon, Michael, and Dave, for your time here today. Thank you very much.